You talked about like getting that calling. What was that?
Yeah. Well, so I'll go back a little bit further. So the history of all this for me is I had so I got my undergraduate degree in psychology, and I wanted to be like a therapist, but I didn't want to do more school than just my undergraduate degree. So that wasn't going to happen. So I went into social work. When I got out of college, I started as an adoption worker. I did adoption and foster care, and I did that for a year, and I loved it, but I didn't make any money. So the next step most people do from there is go to work for the government. You work for the state level. So that's what I did, and I worked welfare. And so that I did for about 5 years, which is the like literal typical burnout point, 5 years. And I did.
I could imagine.
Yeah. So I did. And that was the point where I was diagnosed with PTSD and anxiety. And I had already had depression from previous things from my past before that. So at that point, it was like, this is what I had set for my whole life to be, was doing this kind of work and working with people and helping people. And then I had to go off on disability, and I had so many triggers of things. I couldn't work with a computer anymore. If I sat in front of a computer, it triggered PTSD for me. I had so many different things that triggered that I wasn't going to be able to do a lot of different jobs. And I definitely wasn't going to be able to do that kind of work at that time. So I didn't even know what to do. I was like,
Yeah. It's like
just
your livelihood is all
flailing.
of a sudden. Yeah.
Yeah. I never expected anything like that. So I just started trying everything, literally everything. I was like in insurance sales. I did like supplemental insurance sales. So I was going into people's homes and just doing these memorized presentations, and it was crazy. And that whole world it was like, have you ever seen the movie Boiler Room?
Yes. I've been in the situations you've been in. Yeah.
It was a thing. That's a real thing.
I've been in the boiler room. It's a real thing.
I was there. So yes, I did that. And
Kirby vacuums, like same thing. Yeah.
And did great. And then got sick and did terrible. And so, and I worked as a pet groomer. I worked as a financial planner at a hospital. I worked as a financial advisor, guidance person at a hospital. I worked as a bed traffic controller person in the hospital. So like air traffic control, but instead of planes and landing strips, it's people and beds. Yeah. Like
Someone's got to do that. Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was in a little room with no windows, and I had like the afternoon shift. So it was just, I was like in a cave, and you have a giant digital board of all the beds in the whole hospital. And it's like a video game.
Oh my God.
It was actually awesome. I did that for like 2.5 years. I could have done that probably for longer, but it was the people that I worked with. And that was my main thing. That's what ended up happening at every job I had. I would, something would happen. Like at that job, actually, I ended up getting pregnant with my son, my firstborn. And while I was pregnant, I couldn't take my anxiety medication. And so I actually shifted while I was there into the financial counselor position from the bed control position to make more money. But then I was on the day job, the day shift, and I was sitting out there with all the other people, and I hate to say this, but it does happen. I was with all women, and they all wanted to gossip with each other, and I didn't want to be a part of it, which then made me part of then they wanted to gossip about me. And it all...
You put the target on your back.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And it all got mixed in with the job, and it ended up being awful, and with anxiety. And then I was paranoid. And so then I ended up having to go off again. I was off on FMLA while I was pregnant because my doctor was like, nope, this is too much stress while you're pregnant, And so it was again, like that same kind of situation. And I'm like, this isn't working. So, I did a few, I taught some classes for people who were had misdemeanors and felonies, and to avoid having jail time, they could take these classes. So anger management, impulse control, different things like that. So I was able to kind of use my degree again, the psychology aspect, and do that and teach those classes. And that I did for a good few years. I did that through, and then my daughter was born 2.5 years later. I did that through that whole period. And it was like, I could just make my own schedule. So it was kind of like being self-employed, right?
Yeah.
Because after all these years after that, that's what I ended up figuring out. I just can't work for somebody else. That's what ended up happening. I can't work for somebody else. And I figured that out. It wasn't going to work. Something always would happen where the anxiety would come back, and it would just take over. It just took over, and I couldn't do it.